I'm gonna call the meeting to order. The first order of business, I would say, is I think we need to say the Pledge of Allegiance, because especially in today's world. we need to- So,
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I'm gonna go ahead, if it's okay with council, I'm gonna go ahead and skip the purpose, the mission. I think we'll go to roll call.
Yeah.
And then move on to adjourning the meeting and starting with our workshop. Because there's nothing on the agenda.
That sounds good.
Okay.
Oh, they
You like that?
postponed.
Hey, I'm fast at what I do, so roll call, please.
Okay, Ms. Francis, Ms. Early. Here. Mr. Rockline,
Here,
Mr. Vesey,
Here.
Mr. Zimbelis, Mr. Kuskudis,
Here.
and Mr. Seaman. Okay,
Okay, I would ask the council, do we have a quorum? Do we need a quorum to even continue with the workshop?
You're fine. So the only thing you do need to announce is for number 4, the deferral of application number 22-39 and 23-04 to the November 20th, 2023 meeting held in the commission chambers at 6:30 PM.
So announced? Okay, and with that, there's a little bug here, I'm used to see the killer. Sorry about that. There's a little bug that's running across my, since that has been deferred, I will go ahead and close the meeting, since I think I like the gavel. All right, we're gonna
probably not bad.
convene the workshop session at this point. And I know Renee's not here, but we could pick up where we left off
yeah.
last time. I don't know if anybody has any, or since you weren't here last time, if you had any questions as to having reviewed what in your spare time.
No, I'm fine. No
right.
questions, but thank you for asking.
Okay.
Yeah,
Do you remember where we left off?
we did, I believe, finish both elements we had last time. So what we brought for you tonight is just a quick update on population numbers. And then 2 elements tonight, utilities and conservation.
Okay, and that is the new package that was sitting on our desk.
Yep.
Okay, so let's just move forward.
So we can start with the population numbers if you're ready.
Well,
Which is the first page of that, or second page of that slideshow.
okay,
That's,
so let's,
not print the slideshow.
yeah, it's up on the screen.
all right. Okay,
Okay, so
go ahead.
just real quick, we started this project, believe it or not, 2 years ago now. So the consultant was brought on board in August, September of 2021. At that time, we had the 2020 census, obviously. Those numbers, when you have the census, they don't come out for at least a year. So we had some preliminary, basic numbers from the census. Those are used by the Bureau of Economic and Business Research, BEBR, and by the Schimberg Center for Housing to project population. Our consultants at the time had a projection from Schimberg of 30,955 persons by 2040. That gave us a 5,817 person increase. Since then, Schimberg has revised their numbers after further analysis. So kind of part of it is, you know, when you have the census every 10 years, and then these organizations project out every year out to 2040 or 2050 or whatever far they want to go. And they do it on 5-year increments. The further they get away from the census, the more they're extrapolating and projecting, and the further off it is or less certain it is. When the census comes back, they correct everything. It takes them a while to correct everything. So Schimberg uses the Bieber projections, but they're also looking at housing units and analyzing those and coming up with a more kind of a refined projection. The current number is 27,775 people in 2040, so that's about a little more, I guess, than half the previous projection. That one's a lot more solid because, they've done more in-depth analysis. The good news is we had the density to accommodate the 5,800. We still have the density to accommodate the 2,600. So our number of needed units has dropped to 1,315. We're going to bring back to you with data and analysis. We've got to now rerun the housing numbers for each level of income and all that. So we're going to do that with the consultant, rerun all those numbers and bring that back to you with the data and analysis. And we did note as part of this, we do have 553 units approved right now that are either under construction or haven't started. So those are units that are not yet occupied. I want to say they're all market rate.
So
Not sure. There's some apartments, but
when they count a unit, do they count a unit as 4 people, 5 people?
a unit is a family unit.
Okay.
Yeah, and to your point, that's why we want to look at it closer. And
I would
Ally-
say the unit calculation, at least how to take the number of units needed to equate to your population increase, the average is 2.3 persons per household. So basically we'd take the units multiplied by 2.3 to see what population's been accommodated.
Right.
Can I ask a silly question? I don't profess to know all the calculations by any means, but I'm hearing we need all these units for all these people we're going to have, but if we don't have places for them to live, they won't be here, right?
The state Community Planning Act requires us to use a professionally accepted methodology of population increase and to plan for that increase. So that it's required
So I have a question.
to plan for the increase. So we have to show that we can accommodate them.
Here's the question. At what point does the population reach build-out in Tarpon Springs? I mean, when you could say, okay, we project in 2040, almost 37,000 residents, but at what point have you reached maximum build-out where, obviously there may be some variations in the numbers, but you cannot accommodate any more population. And I'm not talking about a couple here, a couple there.
Yeah, right.
Family moves in an existing residential unit, but there's got to be a tipping point.
And yeah,
That a build-out has deemed to have occurred.
yeah.
Because
And I-
Pat, are you saying, I guess I want to understand, are you saying that we are required to build all this housing, and where's the money going to come from? Or are we required to
We're required
develop Tarpon Springs just to meet that?
Well, we're required to show that we have enough density to accommodate it. We're required to show how we're going to accommodate it.
what-
If we can't accommodate,
But in other words, if the government is telling you've got to be able to accommodate, there's got to be a tipping point where you say, our maximum, or the government says your maximum capacity based on your.
yeah, and maybe there is. So,
Okay, and that's why I'm asking, I don't know if.
and
But
part-
other than annexation,
other than annexation. And part of this, keep in mind, the 553 units does not include single-family homes. So,
Or the
Yeah.
apartments are those apartments counted in?
well, apartments that are not yet built, yeah.
Okay.
But the other thing, keep in mind for Tarpon is we are running out of vacant land
And that begs the
that's
question again.
already annexed in.
Could you, what about those communities that say, what would happen? I'm just curious. If we said, we don't want to develop anymore. I know that's sacrilege to say, but what if we like Tarpon the way it is and we don't want to build any more units?
And I did give you a statutory spreadsheet this time. There's some language, and in fact,
Oh, in
I'd
here?
have to look through to find
Okay.
it, but I remember that was added
Okay,
when Community Planning Act came in, is that you can't,
you can't say no?
without
Can't say.
lack of a better term, you can't just shut the door without a reason.
Oh, okay.
And, yeah, just because you don't,
The reason
Yeah.
can't be because you didn't plan for it.
Right.
yeah, right.
So you have to, when you say plan, what do you mean?
It's a combination of infrastructure and growth management regulations that you put in place through things like your comprehensive plan.
That's what we're working on
Right,
now.
exactly. So, yeah. And you also can't take for granted the fact that you're not necessarily talking about people moving here. You're also talking about people born here. And that population increase as well. So because, they may or may not move away. They may stay here and live here, and that's an increase to your population as well, not just folks that move here from other areas.
Okay.
And what you want to plan for is the strain that puts on your roadways, the strain that puts on your other
Infrastructure,
infrastructure, like
right.
your sewer and water and
And that's getting back
delivery
to
of
this.
city services and things like that. So that's why you have to plan for it, regardless of whether or not there's land that's going to actually be developed. Your population is still likely to increase regardless of whether or not you're actually adding housing units.
So let's go back then to
I just wanted to add one thing, just for clarification too, when we're talking about planning. So we spent a couple workshops ago looking at the future land use element, and part of that was the future land use map, that all those different categories, and that gives you your density allowances and FAR allowances. Just for ease of mind, we don't have, based off the calculations that we have, we don't have to change any of the density allowances that we currently have in place to accommodate this density. So we already kind of have it built in to accommodate what they're projecting. So we're not looking at increasing necessarily. Now it's a matter of how to accommodate it. So what types of housing and things like that.
And,
So.
and for example, having lots, and where you've got a house, it's one thing to have two platted lots that your house sits on. You have one platted lot that's vacant that you could build, sell because it was non-conforming when it was, but to split conforming lots into non-conforming lots,
Can't do.
you can't do. That's what I was going to ask the
Yeah.
question. Okay.
Big no.
Okay.
There's a method for some of the historically platted lots,
Yep.
depending on the situation that someone could go through to deem it buildable. But you couldn't necessarily take a piece of property that's conforming and then go through a process to create a non-conforming lot. The code automatically doesn't allow that, so that wouldn't be a case.
All right, okay, so getting back on track then, going through the goals, objectives, and policies on utility
I
elements.
actually have a couple questions
That's what I
still.
was gonna get to,
Oh.
is let's get to the questions that we have on this.
And I did
Is it on
have
this
one
or is
more
it on-
thing.
Yeah, it's on this.
That's
It,
where
it's
I'm
on
going.
the, what she's discussing right
Okay,
now.
So,
Is that okay?
that's fine.
Okay.
That, the table? Okay.
When do the two curves meet current density and projected population? How far out until they cross, and then we do have a challenge?
When did
So
they
we
meet?
have a
We'll have to
calculable
bring you that
existing
back.
density availability to
So-
us. We have projected population, and then where do those two curves meet?
So you're asking, when is all the current density on the map filled up?
Yes, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years?
We can, well,
When
we
does the
can,
poop hit the fan?
yeah, we can
That's
bring
why we
that
do the
back to you.
analysis, when we do these updates periodically, we have to go through analysis to calculate where we are. So at this point, we're not meeting the increase, and actually, as you can see, when it was originally projected, before we had the fine numbers from 2020 census, they were projecting almost double what they're now more accurately projecting. So I think it will be a while before we have that issue, but that's why we do these every so often.
Increase to 2040.
I'm not sure. Are you asking how many housing units are there now?
No, I guess I guess I thought it was a real straightforward answer. We know what the projected population growth graph is. You know, it's pretty easy to see that, what it's gonna be. We know what our current density allowance total is, right? We know what that density number is within each area, and so isn't it easy to extrapolate and go, okay, these two lines are gonna meet right here when our population exceeds our density allowances?
Yeah, it's easy to extrapolate a number. But,
Okay,
you
and
know,
so,
if-
and
if you-
I didn't realize it was
Yeah,
such a
if-
tough question. I just thought,
Yeah.
is it 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, a
Yeah.
while? Or are they moving?
But yeah, so what I would have to do is take, if I think I'm answering your question, all the land in the different future land uses, find out what their acreage is, multiply that by the density, and then, yeah, so I could extrapolate it, or just,
I certainly wouldn't ask you to do that. I'll be honest, I thought it just went click. Like, we've got those overlay maps, are all color-coded, the densities allowed within each one.
We have in
Right.
the data analysis, which is what we're working on, getting all the numbers updated so you guys can see it. There is a map that basically highlights all the vacant land with their land
Yeah.
use category, the density, and that's where it shows you the calculation that based off this vacant land, this is essentially how many units we can accommodate, this, so the projection, you know, doesn't exceed basically that number. So we do kind of have, I think, what you're looking for
Okay.
in the data analysis, so.
Okay, and I wasn't
Yeah.
looking for a specific
will
answer. I
be-
thought that that would kind of be the target of those two elements right there. I was doing it in my head. I was trying to over here. Okay, I have one other question, so I didn't mean to digress this too far. So the deficiency that we have in housing units right now, do we have to act on that deficiency, or is that deficiency as of today based on that? So we're negative 1,000 units?
Okay,
Or is
we
this a
don't-
nebulous number?
yeah, we don't really have a deficiency,
Okay.
so, we,
We're not
So-
inviting people to come to move here.
yeah, we will be able to show that there is enough land density, single-family units for, yeah, a growing family or whatever to accommodate the growing population. There's no deficiency of unit. Those units do not have to be built, if that's your question.
I guess, why have the number there?
we-
Why say that we've got 13, 15,
But-
we've only got 535 if there's not a purpose for what that number represents? What do we do with that number?
The 553 was just to show you guys that there's a bunch of that already approved.
Okay,
But that number is to show the state that, yes, we can accommodate 1,315 units by 2040. The end of, yeah, if needed.
now I got it. Super, thank you very much.
I mean,
Not just if needed, but if we could provide services.
right, which is what Regina
They
was
may
saying.
be
it's
needed if
all-
we can't provide services. I don't
And
care
when
what our
we
needs
say
are.
we can accommodate, that's all that stuff.
Okay.
The services,
So getting back to this item then, because a lot of this,
yeah, and one more thing on the population slide. We just talked about where those projections come from. And yeah, it's in migration, out migration, it's births, deaths, all that stuff. So it's not just people moving in. The number in the middle, we'll talk about with utilities if we need to. That is the number that Mr. Kiger has to use. We have Tommy Kiger here tonight. He's our Assistant Director for Public Services to help us with utilities. That is calculated in a completely different way by water management, and so if we need to get into that number, we can.
okay, I mean,
So with that, we can start on utilities if
Okay.
you're ready. And I would encourage us to go through the clean version, like we did last time. That worked out very well. We do have the strike-through table ready to look at, if there are questions on any of these policies. I'm also going to ask that we look at Goal 1 and Goal 4 first, if possible. That's wastewater and water. And then we can let Tommy go and do the others. So for this element, we did all the things we've been doing with the other elements. This element had a lot of outdated regulatory and operational language, had a lot of completed initiatives, so hadn't been updated in a while. Next slide. So just a little bit about how this element is organized. It was already organized in this order: sewer, solid waste, stormwater, potable water. So I left it that way to make it less confusing with the numbers. I would just advise that we leave it that way. Each of those infrastructure items addresses a few things. Levels of service, and all four of those are required to have levels of service and meet concurrency by state law. So levels of service, the maintenance of these systems, correcting system deficiencies, planning for system expansions, talking about how you're going to finance all these activities. We've thrown in the efficiency and resiliency measures as well, and then some intergovernmental issues and coordination that's necessary for some of these. So with that, we can go through the element. Tommy's here to answer questions. And let's start with Goal 1, sanitary sewer. Do you just want to go through and just come up with whatever policies you want to talk about?
Yeah, I think that would be good while we preview or peruse the objectives. If anybody wants to put something out or have a question on any one of the items, it'd probably be better if we do it that way, and quicker, then we could address any questions.
Okay. Just looking at some of the initial numbers here for your level of service for your sanitary sewer, how are you arriving at the 100 gallons?
We use the 100 gallons because that's the current FDEP design standard for new sewer services. And so we wanted to conform with DEP design standards.
Okay.
That's probably a little bit conservative nowadays with indoor water use, but if you're going to have to design to that DEP standards, we might as well be consistent.
Okay. So I was just kind of wondering why it went from 82 to 100, because that seems like a significant increase, especially when you always hear, like, they pound into your head, water conservation, water conservation, and you're jumping from the 82 to the 100.
Yeah, and this
But-
is really about how you size your sewer pipes and
Got
pumps
it.
and stuff like that. So having a little bit extra capacity, if you had like high flow days and stuff like that, that's kind of okay. So, but DEP wasn't going to approve any plans that used 82. They require you to design to 100 per capita.
Okay.
So we might as well make that our minimum.
So,
Go ahead, sorry.
no, I just think, I mean, it's up to this board, but I think it's probably easier for us to start going through instead of going item by item and pull out those things that you find or have questions on. And then I have some questions for you, but I'd rather us start going through. My questions may not necessarily be related to the objectives, but
If you'd like, I could maybe give you like just 30, 45 seconds on kind of like how we went about this. It might help frame up the whole discussion. I'm Tommy Kiger. I'm the Assistant Director for Public Services. I'm also a licensed professional engineer in the state of Florida. I've done a lot of planning exercises. I actually used to work for SwiftMud, so I've been on both sides of this planning exercise now. It's interesting to do that. But probably the biggest theme is that we really needed a big refresh on the utilities element to capture our current goals. So the previous element, we were dealing with different challenges. So that was The last 20 years have really been about building out our water supply and addressing our small portion of Tampa Bay's regional water supply issues. So it largely revolved historically around addressing water demands, building out an alternative water treatment facility, building out the reclaim system. And we've largely accomplished those like large 20-year goals that were set, you know, in the early 2000s. And we're kind of at a little bit of an inflection point where we're shifting to, we've built out the utility that we want to have. Most of our facilities are designed to capacity to accommodate our current population and the projected, and it's really now about addressing new emerging concerns like emerging contaminants and continue to build out our well field as needed now that we've got the RO plant in place, and also about making smart investments to switch from building out our utility to maintaining our existing infrastructure as it ages. So that's really the overall theme throughout the utilities element, is addressing our current goals and kind of moving on from some of the past things that we've really largely accomplished for our utility.
But infrastructure or replacing infrastructure, that would be that's a budgeted item, which is really nothing to do with the goals of what we're trying to accomplish. So if you've got an existing treatment plant, and you talked about replacing it, or, you know, over time, that would be something that this has nothing to do with, correct?
I mean, there's definitely an important part of maintaining level of service and establishing goals through the comp plan is, you know, to plan for build out, to continue to
Well,
demonstrate.
build out, I could see, where the goal is to build out to meet the population demands or the population increases, or technology that makes water more the use of water more efficient, or the delivery of water more efficient. My question to you is, maybe I should ask that later on, but
Sure.
but I might as well ask it now. One of the things that we ask when there's a new development is, do we have capacity? When somebody's coming in with 80 houses, 20 houses, do we have the capacity to service them? And the answer has always been yes. And I don't know at what point, and I think it was asked earlier, you know, where's that inflection where, you know, where do we meet where we reach capacity as being able to deliver or serve our residents the water that they need? You know, do we, you know, if you have a problem with a well field, or we have a drought, you know, I mean, that's more, I mean, has there been discussion or consideration, or where does that stop? Because especially when we're looking at annexing property after property after property, where we're expanding our water usage, we know our boundaries now. We don't know what our boundaries are gonna be tomorrow. And it's one thing to infill residents, it's another thing for the boundaries of the city to grow and then infill. So I don't know if you have or could share with us.
Sure. I think there's probably two things that can help address that concern. One is, you know, you're probably not going to like this answer, but this is another one of those ones where the state mandates that we plan for the growth. So the water management district's required every 5 years to adopt a regional water supply plan, and they include, you know, demand projections and population projections for us, and we're required to affirmatively demonstrate that we have plans in place through our water supply facilities work plan to meet all those demands. You know, it's really like not a great look for a city when you get into the situation where you're like rejecting, you know, new construction for water service.
Bennett, but what if you don't? I mean, do you go to the Tampa Bay Water? Is that that's the name of the organization that manages to get to fill in what we don't have? How do we fill? If there was a tipping point, we said, look, we're not able to provide, but we need water sources. Where do we get our water sources if we don't have enough that we're getting ourselves?
Yes. So historically we've been largely a majority importer of our water supplies from Pinellas County. That water is ultimately sourced from the regional Tampa Bay Water Network. We made the decision in the early 2000s to try and become more independent. So we built out our reverse osmosis treatment facility. We're still in the process of building out the well field, but we do still maintain that interconnect with Pinellas County. So if there was a situation where, there was a large sudden expansion perhaps in homes like beyond what we could support with our current well fields or something like that, we do have the ability to work with the county to import water from the regional network to meet our demands and maintain our level of service to our customers.
Mike, are you talking about like quality? Or just excessive?
Quantity, because quality, and I got a question for you on that. What happens when your water comes out brown? Mine's been coming out brown. But that's not for this. Does anybody have any questions based on my?
I do have a couple questions about the planning area. So I know that Tarpon provides water and sewer beyond your municipal borders. Is there an agreed-upon projected service area, and do you have that map available to show them, to show
Good question.
essentially what we have agreed to regionally in terms of our capacity to provide water and sewer beyond the city's borders?
Oh, that's a good question.
So I'm getting confused again. You said we interconnect with Pinellas County for our water here in Tarpon.
That right now we currently use that primarily as an emergency backup. So if something were to happen, we were to have a major water
Okay.
main break. We've been independent on our water supply for the last several years.
Okay.
But if there were to be some peak demand or or just operationally, let's say there was a large fire or something like that on the southern portion of town and the pressure started dropping in the distribution system, we could activate those interconnects to provide water for firefighting purposes, for example.
Okay, thank you.
At your current level of service, like let's say for whatever reason, population stays stagnant at your current level of service, do you have any projections for how long your current water supply would last?
We're working on updating those right now. So right now we're working with our consultant Tetra Tech to kind of refresh our capital program particularly for the water facility. We do need to continue to build out our well field. Originally, the reverse osmosis build out plan called for 22 brackish wells. We currently have 17 in production, so we do have planned to build out additional wells. That'll help us not only to meet future demands, but it's also really important for maintaining the long-term health of the well field, to be able to cycle wells on and off and rest the wells and just do good fundamental well field management. So right now there's not like a distinct line where we're looking in the future where we can't meet demands or anything like that. But we do have a need to continue to build out wells at a relatively steady clip to continue to maintain our current level of service.
Okay. I know probably about almost 15 years ago that they knew there was going to be a drop around the 50-year mark in Pinellas County. And I don't know, that was a while ago. So, and I know they made some future planning for that. That was right around the time when you all chose to source your own supply. So I was wondering if there was a connection with that, or if that is helping, or that's why I specifically asked about the projection for how long you could maintain at your current level of service, if it was 50 to 100 years or less than that.
We currently work on a 20-year planning horizon
20?
for water supply. That's consistent with what we're required to do to
The
address the
state
water management
regulations, right?
district.
Yeah.
So
What happens is that, never mind.
well, and a good rule of thumb is if you want to build a major water supply project, like not just a well, but like build out something considerable and new, it takes about 7 years on average from soup to nuts to develop that project and get it built and operational. So over these 50-year timeframes, if we see like accelerated growth, we'll catch that in the next 5-year update on the regional water supply plan and the water facilities work plan, and we can address it from there. And there's usually time, when you start looking like, okay, hey, things aren't looking so good 15 years out. It's time to start making some alternative plans.
Is there enough water in the aquifer to satisfy the demands of Florida? I mean, you know, everybody keeps pumping water to where it continue to grow. And it's, you know, I know that's a rhetorical question, but you know, you're the ones who dropped the well, so you know how much water's down there. I don't. But,
Well, that's an interesting question. I will say locally or regionally in certain areas of the state, the aquifer is kind of when we say the aquifer, we generally mean the upper Florida aquifer around here. There are areas where there are limits and we're at the limit in some areas on the amount of fresh water that we can extract from certain regions of the upper Florida aquifer. There are other water supplies that are viable, surface water. Reclaim can be used in many areas of the state, including here in Tarpon, to reduce our demand for fresh potable water for irrigation purposes. Conservation's another element that we use to meet our future demands is reducing per capita water use over time. And there's also always desalination. You know, there's plenty of brackish water. We're surrounded by salt water. So ultimately, the state, through this regional water supply planning process, mandates that we look out 20 years, and the state has to develop plans to show that there's going to be enough water to go around for everybody. The general trend is that as water becomes more scarce from traditional sources, those tend to be the cheapest sources, so water tends to become a little bit more expensive over time as you go to water sources that require higher and higher levels of treatment over time.
anybody have any questions on the goals, objectives, or policies?
For the entire package?
Yeah.
Maybe we can go through them
I
one by
I
one
got
if
two
you'd like.
call-outs, but I want to let anybody else go first.
I mean, be nice if we go in order, if you want to just hit if there's anything. Objective 1.1.
I mean, I've gone through them, and
Okay.
some of this is over my
I've got a
head.
question in regards to policy 1.1.3
Okay.
for, can I call you Tom?
Sure.
Tom? I'll just read it for everybody's convenience. City shall require developer participation to fund sewer system expansions when it is deemed necessary by the Public Services Department. Could you or Patricia expand on what that means and what that trigger might be?
Well,
I can answer that. So,
sure.
for when we have new development come in, if it's like new greenfield development and it's not, let's say it's an area that we want to service, but like we need a force main extension or a potable water main extended down a street because there's none that exist in that area, we typically will require new developers to implement the projects to get water service or wastewater service to the new development. So that's not borne by the rest of the ratepayers.
So do we have, did you call it greenfield?
Yeah, if you're developing
Do we
something.
have greenfield within the municipal boundaries of Tarpon Springs that are not being serviced by potable water or pressurized mains right now?
Yeah, there would be areas that would potentially be developable that they just don't happen to have a water main or a force main like right at the front of the property line. So there are some cases where we need to extend that. Another common, maybe more common instance might be if you have to install like a downstream like lift station for wastewater service because of like the grades or something like that, or potentially expand a lift station that's further downstream that's serving a limited population, but could be expanded or have the capacity increased to accommodate a larger population upstream.
And then just to follow up one more, so there's not a hard and fast policy in place that says when X equals Y, then therefore the developer shall pay. It's up to the discretion of the Public Services Department whether the developer ponies up or not?
We typically use our engineering consultants to help with that analysis. For example, like if we have a well-developed area, there's one empty lot, we're not going to do an intensive engineering analysis to determine if building one residence in a largely built-out neighborhood is going to. It's typically not necessary to do that sort of analysis to see like, okay, what's going to happen to the pressures in the water mains. If you're adding 100 or 200 new connections upstream of an existing lift station, we might have our engineering consultants look at, all right, what are the projected flows? What are the flows like in the lift station right now based on our logging data from SCADA and the pump run times? And can that lift station accommodate that many connections for the design flows upstream? And if the answer is no, then we might require that the developer expand the lift station or if there's a pipe that's needs to accept a certain amount of wastewater from upstream. There's design standards that dictate whether or not that pipe will be able to meet that level of service or not.
Does this fall to concurrency?
Yeah. Sewer has to be available at the time the units come online.
Not quite concurrency, and so forgive me, what
It
I'm
is
trying to do is
concurrent.
drill down in exactly when is a proposed, we're gonna assume it's not the one-off. We're gonna assume that it's a 10 off, right, or a 20 off. Is that if there's a vague area on who picks that up, usually the city loses on that, and this is gonna go to the heart of the matter of making sure that developers paid their fair share always, and sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. So I would like to think that there would be a more specific mathematical formula that says, again, if it's under X, well, then the city looks the other way. If it's over X, then the developer shall, not when deemed necessary, because that leaves it to politics and personal opinion.
It's real vague, and I noticed the same policy provision, and I thought, how vague? Who decides how much
Yeah.
and
It
Well,
when?
of
could be
course,
$250,000.
I
Yeah,
think
of
maybe
course.
the discrepancy is not that the Public Services Department is not determining when the developer pays for it. I think what they're deeming the expansion necessary, so that's the threshold right here. Public Services says this is necessary, then that's it's on the developer.
Right, sometimes there's existing infrastructure, and we just asked for one a couple things ago, a downstream analysis of the existing infrastructure, because you want to put something at the end of our pipe, that's going to tell us what happens upstream, is going to happen with the existing pipe, and that's why Tommy's talking about the engineering analysis, because,
Okay, so perhaps
yeah,
I'm not
Public
reading it
Services would
correctly, is that it
analyze.
is structured in a way
Yeah.
that the developer participation, cities shall require developer participation to fund sewer systems expansions when it's deemed necessary.
But what's participation and how much? I guess that's what I keep looking at.
Well, I think what they're talking about is if you have to expand the system to accommodate the development, then you gotta pay for it. Okay? What it costs is a variable, because you don't know what it's
Sure.
gonna cost.
Sure.
So, I think that's the crux of what the,
Okay.
Right.
is that
And
correct?
we do, when we get to the capital improvements element, we will see those policies about proportionate share and
And-
developer-funded
Just-
upgrades and expansions.
Just for, when you do when a developer does have to do it, it's done to city specs,
Yes.
okay?
Okay.
Because they have to take it over from there.
So I'm gonna end.
There's a bill of sale that goes with the pipes and everything.
Yeah, the pipes are typically, depending on whether it's a private or a public, service area, typically all the public infrastructure will be conveyed to the city. And so we require that like all the pumps be the same brand of pumps that we already use.
Yeah,
and
so
things
it's,
like that.
it's pretty defined
Okay.
as to what those how those improvements are put in place.
But I'm with you. I read it and I thought, that's vague. That's
I
very
should have
vague.
read it twice, and then I'll end, and this is not so much a question, but I just want to bring it to the board and to
Well,
the public services. Unfortunately, I sometimes see the utilities as a positive feedback loop, is that they love to build stuff. It's all about planning and expansion, and they want to get some new mains out there where there might be need in the future. That makes great sense. But it only takes a tiny bit of jockeying by developers that are planning long-term out, just to wait for the city to get that main just close enough. And then now, what was undevelopable land, the city has unwillingly participated in developing land that otherwise would not be developed. Now, of course, we have to plan for the future, But I see utilities as a double-edged sword, is that all they want to do, like any bureaucracy, is grow, 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 grow. Let's get bigger, let's get farther. And when that happens, then we're doing that positive feedback loop where we're incidentally creating the same growth that we're trying to control. So that's just my opinion in regards to that. Go ahead, Tom.
If I may, that might be more indicative of practices that are happening in like at the county level, perhaps in like Pasco County or Hillsborough County, where they have like very serious long-term plans for building out like new large diameter water mains to serve future projected growth and things like that. We don't really have that in our capital plan right now. Our capital plan, especially for the water distribution sewer collection system, is almost exclusively focused on retrofitting historic areas of the city, getting old pipe out of the ground. We don't have any major capital projects that are, installing new pipelines out to areas that don't have any customers to service projected populations. That would be something that we would try and capture through the TRC process. And if there was a new large development or, even a moderate sized development coming in, we would typically require that they foot the bill and install the utilities that are necessary
You
to
don't
serve
see-
that community.
You don't see any water wars with us in Pasco County, do you?
No.
Thank you for that answer, and that's very good to hear. I appreciate that.
And we could, if you wanted to consider on policy 1.1.3, we could maybe add something at the end that says, when it is deemed necessary by the Public Services Department, based upon an engineering review, something like that.
Yeah, or to
To
maintain
clarify
level of
what
service or
they are
something.
doing. So,
I like
yeah,
that.
Reasonable.
if you want to add that, we can do that. Okay.
And any additional cost that the contractor or the developer would shoulder, that's in addition to the regular impact fee that's imposed for the permit application, I guess, right?
Yes.
It's not incorporated in that.
I am looking at your concurrency management, and it does have in here what your sufficient available capacity is in section 122.07 for sanitary sewer and 122.06 for potable water. And I would imagine that those are the numbers that have been adopted by law that are going to be applied by your public services director and your engineers when they're looking at this. They are from 93.
Those will be
I remember that.
updated once we get to land development code, after we finish the comp plan update.
Yeah, you all are not alone in that, so don't, you
Yeah.
know, don't feel that you're the only community that has numbers from
Yeah.
that time.
Have you seen the overlay? We had an overlay of potential annexable properties. We had a map that we had. Do you remember the map that we had with potential overlay? Have you had a chance to look at that?
Not recently, no.
Okay, but you have looked at it?
It's been quite a while.
I would imagine it probably matches the map for your deliverable services that are outside your community. A lot of times, that's how they plan that, when they look at where you're going to be delivering services to. That's why you have things in your code that talk about requiring properties to annex in when you're or to at least apply to annex in when you're delivering them water and sewer. It's because they're in that area that you're, supplying city services to, essentially. And so those maps will usually coincide with each other.
And our utility service area generally conforms to the city boundaries. There are a few exceptions over like on the north side of Lake Tarpon where, for example, Pinellas County already had pipelines in place over there, and they provide a small level of service to some of our customers. We provide a handful of services in what would typically be the county service area that are outside the city limits. But we generally plan, and the Water Management District requires to plan for our existing service area and a projected future service area in our submittals for our water use permit and through the regional water supply plan. Those are the same. So we're not doing a lot of planning for a future capacity for additional annexations or anything like that. We're focused on our current service area.
So, what you just said, you're not planning for future annexations?
We currently plan for our current service area. Our current service area and our future projected service area are the same.
Okay, but you're, Okay, I don't know, did I hear it? I don't know if I heard it right.
Yeah, they're not gonna build it until they come. They're not gonna
Okay,
build
but-
it.
but
hoping
you
they
can
come.
provide it, but you can provide it.
Yeah, we don't wanna build it and they.
No, 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 I'm not saying build it, I'm looking at the capacity to provide it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Have the capacity to provide those.
Yeah, typically. I mean, obviously, capacity is that there's a lot of things that go into that. Like, for the wastewater side, you're looking at all the way from the plant. Do we have enough excess capacity or unused capacity at the plant to accommodate everybody? And then you have to look at every lift station up the line, depending on how far you are and the size of the pipes all the way out. So
Because when we look at annexation, I don't know, are we taking for granted? Because the question is, could we provide the annexed property proper water service? So are we taking for granted that you can? I guess that is the question. I'm not talking about building the pipes, because like you said, you build it, when they need it, you'll build it. But it's being able to provide it.
And that's part of your criteria for annexation. So yeah, you're looking at that every time. And remember, some of your, like the last two annexations you looked at were properties where our line was either already going past the property
Yeah.
or it was coming up to the property. So that's a lot of what they see.
I do, in looking at what's in here, it says, it has a different number for your design standards.
Yes.
In your ordinance, it says sufficient available capacity to maintain the following levels of service shall be demonstrated. Minimum design flow 200 GPD, which is twice what it looks like is required by FDEP and well more than twice what was previously in your comp plan. And then the reduction, what is it when it says reduction of minimum design flow to 175? What does that mean?
I would have to review that in detail.
Okay,
I mean,
all
I
right.
think those are all things that, once we get the comp plan updated, we're going to want to
We're gonna
update
go-
those
yeah,
numbers
yeah,
too.
Yeah.
We don't want folks over-designing pipe. There's
That's-
problems
yeah,
associated
'cause
with
that's
that
like
too.
That sounds like double, and I know that can reduce pressure and things like that if it's over-designed, right?
Yes, there can be problems with having too much excess capacity in your distribution or sewer collection system.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Cardass, for locating that large discrepancy in our ordinance and what the Utilities Department is planning for. I would like to put an exclamation point behind that and maybe an asterisk to make that clarification quicker rather than at some point vague in the future, as to why there's such a difference.
Okay, moving on. Any other questions under objective 1.1? Objective, none, let's, 1.2. I do have a question on 1.2.1, where it talks about the utilizing results of the 2023 citywide vulnerability assessment. How often is that updated?
Well, we're working on the first one right now, so right now we're just trying to. This is something that's going to be required. This is a relatively new thing from the state of Florida. They've through the Resilient Florida program, they provided state funding. So we're currently planning on completing ours right now. We're about 70%
What would be the
complete.
cycle then of revisiting your vulnerability? Is it every 5 years, every 7 years?
I would expect that for the vulnerability component, that shouldn't change dramatically over the course of 5 years. We might want to do minor updates, maybe on a 5-year planning horizon.
So should we add language that says that with regard to, I don't want to leave 2023 as the benchmark for vulnerability when things change 10 years from now. So I think we probably need to include language that would require that be reevaluated or evaluated on a periodic basis. And I don't know how, if anybody got some suggested language.
Is that something that would be like 5 years or 10 years? Or?
I think maybe one thing that we could do there, we don't want to bind ourselves to do studies all the time, but perhaps a simple solution would be the most recently completed citywide vulnerability assessment report, because we might find that, maybe we're working through our plan and we've got a lot of good projects and we want to be focused on implementation over like a 10-year horizon. But this is still really relatively new for the city to do this exercise. So maybe the most recently adopted would be a good language or something to that speaks to the fact that we will be doing updates or could do updates on a different timeframes, but that we want to capture the most accurate information.
So we would change the results, instead of 2023, it would be the most recently adopted.
Yeah.
And I would imagine, Tommy, we are doing that partly to get our funding from Resilient Florida Act. And I imagine every once in a while, they may update the requirements of the assessment that has to be done. So we'll have to respond to that.
So did you get that most recently? Okay.
Yep, got it.
Any other questions on 1.2? 1.3. Anybody have questions on 1.3? 1.4?
Well, don't move to 1.4 yet. Objective 1.3,
Okay.
current language, we ensure that development permits are issued only when adequate capacity. And then when you went over to the proposed language, it simply says repair, replace, and rehabilitate aging wastewater infrastructure in a proactive manner. So they're totally unrelated to each other.
Right, so, and if you want to refer to your strike-through table, so that was unnecessary. The old objective 1.3 is now covered in the level of service objective 1.1. So
Okay.
it was just struck, and
I'm sorry. Okay.
that's okay. No, that's a good question, so
Okay.
Going
Sorry.
created
to
a
hold you
new
That's all right,
objective.
going to one.
Yep, that's perfect.
1.4, anybody have any questions on 1.4? One point five.
Maybe it's too simplified? I don't. Coordinate the extension of the sewer system to meet future needs.
Which one are you looking at?
I'm sorry, 1.5?
Okay.
And yeah, that first policy, 1.5.1, is the 20-year plan Tommy was talking about.
Okay, so that's sort of just the umbrella goal and then
Yeah.
underneath. Okay, I'm sorry, got it.
1.6. Do y'all ever
I'd
pump,
l-
sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna make a joke. I was just gonna say, and our water costs will never increase.
Yeah,
You can
well,
add that
we
in
could
there.
add that in.
In
Ever
my
pump-
dreams.
Do we ever pump water in our wells? Do we ever pump as a storage? Do we ever store water?
No, I think the technology you're referring to there is called aquifer storage and retrieval.
Yeah.
That's common in reclaim systems, generally kind of a little bit further south of here or further inland, where you basically use a non-potable zone in the aquifer. You pump through your excess reclaimed water in, and you build a bubble of fresh water, and then you pump it out when you need it. We just don't. We've looked into that in the past, but we don't really have geology that's conducive to that sort of storage.
Just asking, okay. Moving on, 1.7. think that goes to your no charge,
Yeah,
no
yeah.
more charges.
rates.
Yeah. Well,
Do y'all currently keep a percentage of reserve when you, 1.7.2 set aside funds? So y'all must have a reserve in place?
Yes, we have a reserve target. I believe our current reserve target is 2/4 of worth of annual operating costs. This is something we've been looking very hard at lately with obviously, people have probably seen in the general board meetings that we've just completed a new
So-
water sewer rate sufficiency study.
Yeah. So should that be benchmarked in the language?
It's inherently benchmarked to the cost of operations. As the operational budget goes up, the benchmark for required reserves goes up as well. So as
It's
long
a
as our budget
percentage.
continues to increase to meet existing operational
So
costs.
is it a percentage of that? I mean, in other words, if it increases, it doesn't fluctuate, it's based on a percentage, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm just looking to making it a requirement, that you have sufficient budgeting to meet that instead of having to make a demand for a capital cost when you're out of when you go beyond your budget.
Could you restate that maybe?
Okay, if there was language in there that, because it's not a hard and fast number, it could be, right now, it's something nebulous. Okay, set aside funds, well, is it based on a percentage of what? In other words, do we put the language in there that requires you to put a percentage of something aside for future, for future
So-
repair or replacement?
For municipalities, there's like accounting standards for the different funds, and you have a water and sewer fund that's dedicated to this type of thing. And when you do your annual financial audits, they look at that and tell you whether or not you're meeting those goals appropriately and in a fiscally sound and responsible manner. So that's actually something that your financial audit tells you annually.
But there's
There
somebody
is,
telling
there's a
you-
check, yeah, there's an outside source in terms of how those accounting standards are structured that help you to determine whether or not you're meeting those goals.
But that's
You're
a-
just
that's
setting the
somebody
goal to
else's-
meet that here, right, yeah.
All right.
And we're currently doing annual rate checkups to examine the financial health of the utility. To your point, I mean, we are anticipating that we could fall below our target next year due to some of the inflationary pressures that we've experienced. And we have a standard that if you do fall below that threshold, you have 2 years, you have to develop a rate plan and a financial management plan to return that to that level of funding with.
Let's move on. Anybody have any other questions on that? Let's move on to goal 2.
Okay, I'm gonna ask that we skip over to goal 4 on page 6 and do water. And then tackle the other two facilities that,
Okay.
after Tommy's.
Goal
So
6,
that
you
starts
said?
about in the middle of page 6 is
Oh,
goal 4.
Goal 4, okay. Okay, 4.1. That's a different number of gallons, again.
110.
It's typical to have a higher level of service standard for water versus sewer because of outdoor water uses. So not all of the water that we deliver to our customers is returned to the sanitary sewer system.
And then there's even different ones in the ordinance again too, so it's kind of like the same thing as the other one, where this one says it's 150 GPCD, this is 122.06, and it has, interestingly enough, though, the PSI pressure to the end user is lower than what's provided for in here. So,
We'll have to
yeah,
update those.
yeah.
Anybody else have any questions on 4.1 before we move on to 4.2? Okay.
I have a question on 4.2. End of the sentence. Tarpon Springs service area. I know we kind of touched on this before. Is that service area a fixed area? Meaning that it's not, obviously it's not contracting, but does that service area possibly expand? Or is, we know what it is today as fixed and that's it forever?
No, it could expand if we have folks that are like just outside of our service area. And like, for example, like you spoke to earlier, if they annex in, we update our service area maps accordingly.
So the service area isn't the existing service area, it's the possible service area that is the annexation overlay map.
The service area is the service area. It's incorporated into our permit from the water management district, and so we do provide them updates periodically. But the service area, as defined, is exactly who we're obligated to serve currently right now.
So the way I read that, and I could be wrong, is I'm hearing that if someone were to interpret service area differently, that our utilities department is at this moment required to provide a certain level of service or plan for it for the entire could-be service area. It doesn't say today's service area, it says service area.
Well, you're talking about potential service, a
Right.
potential service area.
Right.
This just says in the service area, which he's saying is the defined,
Okay.
the defined one.
And that definition could be fluid, for lack of a better term. That, you know, if it grew 1% or 5%, the plan would seek to accommodate that.
And I will say, our service area has been relatively minor changes over the last like number of years. So, you know, we're really focused on here on just saying this is who we serve, this is our level of service, and we want to make sure that we're planning for that, and that everyone who's inside of our service area is going to continue to maintain adequate levels of service as we move forward.
Can I ask a question? What are internal water systems? It comes in 4.2.2? Is the
Oh,
develop-
that's privately owned.
Yeah, that's like if you build a new subdivision. I believe that is we're basically stating that if you build a new subdivision, the developer's going to be responsible for developing or for installing all the water mains and sewer mains inside the development.
Okay.
And so those have to be to city
Gotcha.
specs.
Thanks.
And
Like a
that's
condo,
whether,
they'll take the water to the condo. It supplies service to the entire building, but the association controls the plumbing of the entire building.
Yes. Or if we had a small development come in, you know, like townhomes or something like that, and they happen to be, you know, at a grade where they have to pump up for the wastewater service, they have to install a lift station. Their lift station has to be built to city specs so that if we have to do emergency service on it, we know what we're working on.
Does the city normally service lift stations in developments, or do the residents have to service their own lift stations?
We have a mix in our service area of privately owned and city-owned lift stations. I believe we have 61 or 62 publicly owned lift stations, and there's a larger number of
I have a
private lift stations.
I have a lift station
Yeah.
in my office.
Yeah, so that could be something as simple as, you know, like a small shopping plaza. You know, they just need to pump their water up to the city water main because they're at a lower elevation. So they have a small private lift station to serve the building. And we have a permit process for those, so those get an operating permit, and our folks go and inspect them periodically as well.
Okay.
yeah, and you all have seen subdivisions that are gated and ones that aren't.
Right.
And so you all know from looking at those that the gated private ones, they're master metered, but all that infrastructure has to be built to city standards, even though we aren't managing the internal
Okay.
system.
Well, it
So,
makes sense, yeah.
yeah. Okay.
I may have missed it. I don't see a lot in here on water testing, and that may be inherent in some of the other things in here, but like water quality testing and standards for that.
I would say that from a water quality standpoint, are you talking about potable water?
Yes.
That's very well regulated by the DEP and the EPA, so we can't operate without meeting those federal water
Right.
quality standards, so it's
So,
just kind of
okay.
redundant to put it in the comp plan.
Okay.
So what you would be suggesting is language that says that they would maintain quality standards as set forth by blankety blank blank. or
Well,
that is-
I think they already had something that said they'll meet all state, wasn't there an objective or a policy that said you'd meet all state and federal regulatory? So that would probably cover that.
Fair enough.
There was one other thing, though, that I was kind of curious about regarding your coordination. It looks like you guys are taking in 4.5.3 Tampa Bay Water kind of out of that equation. Is that because you do contract directly with Pinellas County for emergency situations? There's no need, and they contract with Tampa Bay Water, or what's that relationship like?
This was really just a matter of cleaning up historical language. So, for some reason, in the past, it used to say Tampa Bay Water. That's probably going back to when Tampa Bay Water was more at the forefront
yeah,
of building out these big regional facilities. So, they're still captured in there in other regional entities. Like, we didn't want to leave anybody out, but we also don't do a lot of coordination directly with Tampa Bay Water anyway. So, we
Okay.
mostly work through the county on our water supply facilities work plan, and if they find the need to address their wholesale supplier, they work through Tampa Bay Water because they're a member government.
Got it. Okay.
Okay, any other questions on 4.2? 4.3. Gone. 4.4.
Do you have a lot of cast iron and galvanized water pipes left, or are they pretty much almost gone?
No, we still have a healthy amount of those in the city. In our current CIP, we're still a little bit in flux on the CIP. We're going to be continuing to work on it over the next year or so. But we've got kind of a 30-year plan to get those out of it's a generational commitment is what it is. I mean, there's, we had a lot of early 20th century development. That feels kind of weird to say. So we do have some legacy pipe materials in the ground from the, mid-century era and even a little bit of pre-war pipes. So a lot of that stuff does last 100 years or better. So we have proactively tried to budget to replace that over time.
Okay.
Is there a place for reclaim within this we got lots of potables and waste, but I don't think I've noticed anything about our reclaim program anywhere and emphasis or plans for it.
It was 75%. I saw a number.
Yeah, I think reclaim's a draft, 1.6.
Okay, so I missed that altogether. That's perfect. Okay. 1.6?
Yeah.
In the sewer section.
I will tell you, it's really hard to get those water saver jiggers out of your shower heads now.
Awkward. Just go ahead and cut the tags off your mattresses while you're at it.
I'm going to pretend I didn't hear any of this.
Mattress police out here.
I confess I wanted to. I didn't.
Misdemeanor. Okay, is that, you okay?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay. 4.4, I'm looking at 4.4.8, I'm just gonna read it. Provide a process and appropriate criteria for property located in the unincorporated areas of Pinellas County requiring city service for potable water to annex into the municipal limits of the city. So that's where I think we look at the overlay.
And we do have that process, as you know.
Yeah, yeah, because that's actually a required, requirement before we agree to annexation in any event that we have the capacity and the ability to provide water. Okay,
Question about 4.4.5 for explore modifying the building code and land development regulations to provide standards for improved indoor and outdoor water conservation and new construction, but the original language, so it's adding, modifying land development regulations in conjunction with the building code, but it's also taking out remodeled buildings, which I don't know why that would be, why that's omitted from this, from the new language.
I'm not sure. We can put that back in if you want.
I think part of that too
I mean,
is to address, it's been a while since we've updated these standards, and in the, I want to say in 1995, it might be 93, there was a adopted at the national level, like a national plumbing code. So with regard to remodels, we didn't include that in here specifically. Because a lot of these things, like you can't buy a 3-gallon per flush toilet anymore. Like they're just not sold. So any fixture you're going to get nowadays has to conform to water efficiency standards. So knowing that you can't go down to Home Depot or Lowe's and buy an inherently wasteful fixture, it's kind of already handled through what's available on the market.
Forgive me for liking water pressure, I just really do.
Everybody likes water pressure.
So I'm going to segue, and it's not so much a question, but it's kind of a thought experiment that has to do with Ms. Francis's point about 4.4.5, and I'd made a note under 4.4.6, and of course, we know that I missed the whole thing on reclaimed water back there. Okay, so here's you got to bear with me on this. It'll make sense in a second. 5 or 8 years ago, Mr. Smith did a presentation, Paul Smith's head of the, to the city council, and for some reason I was there at that meeting. And it was kind of an annual rate change meeting. It was kind of a big deal, and Paul had put together a nice presentation, and there was going to be an increase in the standard rate for potable water. Well, lo and behold, this group of residents showed up and put on a big brouhaha over this increase. They were really uptight. And the reason that they were really uptight is they had really high water bills. Well, it turns out that was a brand-new development out on Anclote River where we had allowed so many homes to be put in. And all these new residents, most of whom weren't local and bought these homes, didn't realize they had to water their lawns potable water. They got all these new homes and all these green lawns, and they're required by their HOA documents to maintain it, but the only way they can water is with potable water. So I'm going to tie this back in a circle. So here we just had this gentleman say that you can't even buy a 3-gallon toilet anymore. Nope, it's 1.5. And she can't take a shower, but yet we allow developments to be built. The only way they can water their lawns is with potable water, which just threw away all the savings that we might have had. So then, therefore, that begets, rather than explore modifying the building code, maybe that language should be much more aggressive, and instead of exploring, we already know that we need to change it, is that require the building code or developers to provide an alternate service to irrigate. They're like, well, there's no reclaimed water. Okay, drill a well. Make a community well. Make it a standard so that potable water is not being used for irrigation. Just a thought experiment there. If anybody wants to put any input on that or give it any teeth, please.
It's an extremely logical point.
May be difficult
We're worried about
And-
flushing too many gallons down the toilet and they're spewing them all over their grass.
Right?
The only
Your
downside-
water's on your neighbor's lawn.
The only downside to that
Yep.
is, like, you drill a well, to handle that, your well runs dry.
I'm not gonna disagree. As someone who's fought wells and rust wells, and I live in an HOA where we had a deep well that didn't work, I don't have the solution, but what I do see is incongruence with the policies that we there
How
that
about-
don't make any
How about
sense.
require reclaimed water, to the extent it is available?
Well, those,
They
go
require it
ahead, Tom,
anyways.
because those master lines have been laid.
Don't you,
and
you
there aren't
required it
any.
anyways, though, don't you?
Yeah, if you, so, two things. We are very aware of the kind of phenomenon with new development coming in. So like our average residential water consumption is about 42, 43, 4,400 gallons a month. So like not really a lot. And that's kind of indicative of the fact that most of our residents don't irrigate. If you look at the historical areas of the city, most folks don't irrigate with potable water for sure. And a lot of the folks that do are using reclaimed. The areas that we do, when we see new development come in, it is a common refrain that folks come in, they've got newly established landscape, developers tend to leave the irrigation timers on pretty high, and so folks move in, they got their brand new house with brand new stuff, and their system's set up to water 5 days a week, which is not allowed, and they get outrageous water bills because they're dumping water onto this barely established landscape. And so that's something that we're keenly aware of. We know it makes frustrated new neighbors. We know that it makes frustrated new neighbors who like to come to meetings and let us know that they're frustrated. And it is also like not a great use of water. So in all this conservation stuff, we are kind of going to be more heavily focused on outdoor. Indoor has become very efficient over time. And there's actually some tie-ins with the newly adopted city sustainability plan about looking at outdoor landscape code and stuff like that. So this is something we're going to be like really have a keen eye on. We do want to explore all our options. That's why we didn't make a super firm recommendation, because this is also tied to multiple other plans. But this is definitely something that we've got in the works with our sustainability coordinator, and we're probably going to be working on it later this year. So some sort of code updates after the comp plan's adopted to address outdoor water conservation.
I actually see a business opportunity.
Well, thank you very much for that detailed answer. I would repeat, I would like to see the word explore struck and modify capitalized. Instead of making it, let's think about it and pass it down the road, let's make it happen.
Take the word out.
That's exactly what this
Which number
meeting
are
is
you on?
for. So I'm at 4.4.5.
Okay.
And I would propose that we change the language to say modify the building code and land development regulation, provide standards for improved outdoor water conservation in new construction. I would,
Is gonna happen anyway, he says, so there's nothing wrong with that change.
We could do a local code
Right.
amendment.
Right.
What language
Them out.
require?
Just explore it.
they
We
have
looked
so
at
much,
everything.
they have so much to do. They're never gonna explore this, right? Something else is gonna get in the way. You were just sharing with us how busy and the department is. I said it was this way and you're like, oh, no, it's this. Okay.
we have
There's
lots of
gonna be
stuff
no
going
time
on.
to explore.
One of the things we have going on is this. We were talking about this on Friday, so we're very much. I appreciate you guys' commitment to force us to do this, but we're pretty committed already. So.
After this summer.
Outdoor. My neighborhood at Grassy Point was built without reclaimed water. 186 homes, all lawns, minimum front, minimum back, and every person watered with potable water. Period. That was
I
built
did it in my
in
office.
99 to 2001. So the idea that it's unique and there's not that many, I don't know. My daughter just got a letter from the city saying she was the #1 water user that month, about 3 months ago. I'm not kidding, because we turned on her irrigation system and she wasn't paying attention to it. I think it's a much bigger problem than meets the eye, and as part of conservation, I would like to see stronger language.
I was waiting until we got someone comment on one of those letters. we sent out the top 100.
Dad, I told you not to turn it on.
I knew those would be coming back eventually.
30,000 gallons like a month ago, so.
It happens, right? And the city does an
Was a leak.
incredibly good job at helping people know and helping them structure, but everybody likes green, everybody has lawns. And very, very, very few people have those wells that produce unrust water. I have one. It's a miracle.
One more thing to your point regarding reclaimed, you know, we require folks to hook up when they're like in our service area, you know what I mean, which is basically along the current built-out master plan for reclaimed. That being said, we are kind of making a shift from using reclaimed as a way to reduce our impacts to the environment to where now it's becoming a resource that the demand is starting to exceed the supply a little bit. So we have reclaimed outage days. So we don't have any major plans for any future reclaimed retrofits. We're already at 80% reuse. And that 20% that we're not using is really only available in the very wet months. So you're talking about late, like July, August, September, when no one needs water for irrigation anyway, because it's raining like crazy. Because it's raining a lot, you know, the wastewater flows do tend to be up a little bit. So we did do some studies to look at the potential to expand reclaim over time, particularly north of the river, but it wasn't financially feasible, and it would have resulted in very, very large capital costs for very, very minor increases in reclaimed availability.
So reclaim is maxed for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, we're going to continue as if there was to be like a new development come in, we're continuing to evaluate those on a case-by-case basis to determine if there's reclaimed availability based on their future projected flows, and that's largely dictated by density. So a very dense, you know, townhome community is with relatively minor irrigation area. We might require them to hook up, but we're also going to make sure that we're not forcing. We're going to mostly focus, and this is what most other utilities in the area are doing, is they've built out their reclaim system and they're focused on making everyone who's new connect and not doing a lot of expensive retrofits.
Okay. You're on. Want to move on to objective 4.5?
I think we can continue forward in kind of in a freelance objective 4.5. And objective 4.6.
I also will point out, this is where we do capture emerging water quality standards, to your point earlier.
And that appears to be the end of that section.
So yeah, if you want to go back to goal 2 on page 2, unless you have anything else for Tommy, I don't know that we,
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Thank you, it was a
Appreciate it.
pleasure.
okay, thanks for coming. All right, so goal 2 has to do with solid waste disposal.
Where did we leave off? 2 point.
Yeah, goal 2, page 2, near the bottom of page 2.
Thank you. Any questions on 2.1? 2.2? Any questions on 2.2? Let me ask a question. On 2.2.1, we have a contract with Waste Management. That's also for commercial dumpsters, et cetera. do we allow other vendors commercial dumpsters, because I see them?
No, so the city is the designated servicer of solid waste. If there's a special need, like a construction,
Construction site, that's what I
then,
meant.
yeah, if waste management cannot service them, then yes, we do allow.
Okay. Is there any rules with people using your dumpster to dump their mattresses and trash all the time? No?
Yeah, no trespassing.
I'm thinking of setting up a camera. It's not you, is it?
We have one in transfer station, which is a real, that doesn't exist almost anywhere else. The fact that you can drive to our transfer station and get rid of waste, that's a real gem.
Objective 2.3.
Oh.
2.4. Point 5.
If I could just for a second, does anybody know the answer to this? I'm looking at 2.4.3. And I was looking at the old language and it, not the new, but I notice on Mears, they have the yard waste. And
have
somebody
the-
said it's huge,
The what? I'm sorry.
the yard waste after the waste. And somebody said they have some kind of a machine, but it's broken. Anybody
Turns it
know
into
about
mul-
that?
Yeah, it turns it into mulch.
Yeah.
You can go get the mulch if you want it.
But it's not working apparently?
Well, we have a hauler that, I think, we use a facility, I believe it's in Basco County, to turn that into mulch. I'm not sure.
Oh, okay, I thought we actually
If we
had
have
the-
an inoperable or broken one at the site, I'm not sure about that. I'd have to
Oh, I
ask,
just
but
wondered.
yeah,
I thought it was on site.
there might be one on site.
I thought there
but-
was one on site.
But we do, right now at least,
Okay.
check with Public Works, because I was curious about that too right now.
Because it's getting bigger and bigger.
You need mulch in your yard?
No.
Okay, objective 2.4. This should be a packaging question. How do you get manufacturers not to create more waste through their packaging? That's a different issue. Anybody have any questions on 2.4? 2.5.
And that last policy should be 2.5.3. I see a typo there.
Then we'll move on to goal number 3.
This is stormwater.
So are we on goal 3 now?
Yes.
Okay. if I may.
Unless you have to go back, unless you have questions.
No,
on-
no, I'm all about three. I would have thought that Tom would have had input on three with stormwater management. Would that have not have fallen under utilities?
No, that's under Public Works.
And that is not under,
No, Tommy's Public Services, which has utilities.
okay,
Public Works has Streets and Stormwater, which is Tom Function.
okay,
And Tony Manillo is the Streets and Stormwater Supervisor.
okay. So, I do have a comment on, somewhere in the threes, if I may.
Okay.
3.1.2 and 3.1.3, and I won't bore you with reading them. They talk about, hey, we flood. Flooding's gonna get worse, and new developments are gonna be held to this highest standard for taking care of stormwater. That's not our problem. Our problem isn't stuff that hasn't been built yet. It's stuff that is built right now. And so my comment and looking for some help, and I have brought this up before under different sections of this plan, because we've seen it lifetime with our eyes, where there are properties that have vast expanses of blacktop that have no stormwater retention at all, and we are handcuffed right now as a city to force them to improve their stormwater, because right now they are dumping freely into the public system when they have ample land to contain their own. So then therefore, how can we create a retroactive enforcement for some of these, even if there's just a few of them? They're big and they make a big impact.
You know, I agree with you. It's hard to go back. I think it's illegal to go back and require somebody to do something after they've been permitted and built, but.
And some of these are very historical properties, right?
Right, well, take the Wood-Dixie Shopping.
That's where I'm
Plaza.
at, dude, I know, I'm at that one.
Okay. You know,
5-6 acres of blacktop,
or the Publix parking lot.
you bet.
Okay, now, and this will go on to conservation elements and goals and other parts that we haven't talked about yet. But we had talked about incentivizing or doing something at a city level on these parking lot, mammoth parking lots, to allow them or do something that would take away parking spots to create more green space.
You're right about that, to create an incentive program, maybe some density too, or parking and
Well,
such.
you know, and you know, like Publix, you don't need all that, you know, I was at Publix the other day, and they planted the trees based on what they were required to do when they built, okay?
Are there any trees left?
If you look at the trees.
Yeah.
They're half dead. Okay? They're this caliber, they're
Yep.
half dead.
All of it's dead.
Okay.
Winn-Dixie's even better, right?
Okay.
Or the one that's being redeveloped
Right.
just north of that.
Yeah, so how do you, and maybe this is a rhetorical question, how do we go back, and I know we're going off on tangent here, but how do we go back and say, okay, owner of Publix, shopping center, yeah, you know, it would be good, public policy, it would be good, it will, you know, it will advertise it and give you kudos and give you an award. If you converted some of your parking into green space with more mature trees, some islands, et cetera, that would alleviate some of the runoff.
But
It's
then
not
they'll
gonna
say
stop
we
it.
can't water them because we don't have reclaimed water.
Okay, well, that actually can be solved,
Okay,
because, and so you get two birds with one stone.
okay, good.
And we're gonna use the still undeveloped, North Maras development right there. Okay, so they have neither green space, nor do they have stormwater runoff.
Yeah, so-
So instead of building curbed up locations, you build swale down locations that act as two things as once. They act as stormwater retention and green spaces at the same time. And if you put the right soils and product into it, it also acts as a cleansing mechanism. So then all those oils and tars that are created on the parking lot feed into them and naturally clean themselves and go back into the ground. And it arguably is less expensive than maintaining the pavement that occupies those spaces.
I will tell you, that would be that's beyond this board, obviously.
But I just meant the solutions are there, we just continue to step right
but-
over the top of them.
But,
Yeah,
you know, that's something that, staff can look at,
Explore.
explore, an opportunity, not that you don't have a lot on your plate,
yeah.
but it goes back to, our sustainability.
Yeah.
And if I recall, we had a discussion maybe in our future land use when Renee was here about how a lot of these shopping centers want to maximize their parking, that we could look at either incentives or even some regulatory criteria.
Yeah, I think that we
can't-
talked about, I
so-
have to go back to our notes, about basically setting the policy here to explore, or whatever, lack of a better word, different types of land development code regulations that we can put in place to achieve those
Yeah, but
items.
that's
So
for-
it's
that's for
something,
new development, but
right,
how
but
do
then
we
also, we talked about
redevelopment.
thresholds of redevelopment, because right now, like I said, for the Mirror Shopping Center, like we said, what they did was basically facade work from the land development code purpose, and that doesn't require you to bring other things up to compliance. If they did an expansion of a certain magnitude, then that would have required them to do more to come into compliance. So we can look at those thresholds and different mechanisms. So I think that we put some policy, I want to say it was in the future land use element is where we
do
marked
too.
to add it. So we captured that, so gives us basically a direction, incentive to then make the changes.
But you're not gonna see Winn-Dixie, or the old Winn-Dixie Shopping Plaza do anything, because they don't have to. And
Well-
there's nothing in the code that says they have to.
Right now.
No, right now.
Right now,
That's what we were
correct.
talking about looking at.
Proactively.
No,
Right.
but we can put triggers in place now. Forgive me for interrupting. So that is true. We did talk about that, and then I'll tell you how they will bypass that, even if we had a trigger. And then I would ask if Ms. Kardash might be able to, when we're done, I suspect that you might have some suggestions and some verbiage that we can do that might, if anyone is interested in that.
Yeah, I'm not sure what your current, like, ISRs are for your new development, if you've changed that already to address this, or that you still have the old ones.
We have not adjusted any of the ISRs, and that's all designated in the future land use categories. But I think one thing we talked about, let me take a step back. One thing we did talk about after this conversation came up the last time was currently residential, single-family residential properties, they don't have an ISR requirement. So we looked at potentially applying what we typically do to non-residential to residential. So that kind of can help on the residential aspect, because right now there's none. So we did talk about potentially changing those, but as far as some of the commercial designations, we've not adjusted those. So we can look back, that is a comprehensive plan standard, but I think it's kind of twofold. I think we need to have, potentially look at those ISR requirements, but also look at development requirements and different ways to develop that. Basically, so you catch it now for future development, and then now put some triggers, like you said, in place to, require people to come into compliance when they're doing different types of renovations that don't mean expanding the building size.
Right, and so I can give you some feedback
me get my
on
pen.
those triggers, but I'll just goal 3 says provide, I would also scratch cost effective. Nothing is cost effective. Provide stormwater management program. Now, we don't necessarily need a cost effective one, we need one that works. That alleviates chronic flooding. So that's the goal, is that we've got to have a program that alleviates chronic flooding, and just working on things those words are really saying we have to go backwards because our chronic flooding is being caused by bad decision-making in the past that we have to fix and improve the quality discharging. I'm not concerned about that.
Have we
Okay.
looked at any other communities that have done what he's talking about?
You have to remember, when you think about things like the FEMA 50% rule, everybody hates, right? That's really essentially what that rule was designed to do. It creates that trigger. So you're actually talking about something that essentially in land development law already exists. You just have to apply it in a certain way. You can always apply it more stringently, but you're looking at when you hit these certain thresholds, bringing the entire property up to a certain level of compliance that benefits the rest, not only the property itself, but the rest of the community. And in those particular instances, they tie it to the amount of spending, with the rationale being, if you have enough money to invest, to put, 50% of the value back into the property, then you probably have the money to bring it up to current codes. So there's already this sort of mechanism that's a model for exactly what you're talking about by hitting these trigger points that essentially mandates that the property be brought into compliance.
That's right. And of course, there's an entire industry of how you get by the FEMA 50% rule, and it's structured, and they actually call it in St. Pete, it's called the 49% rule in St. Pete. They don't want anybody getting near the 50. And all you do is permit it over a 5-year period. Open one, close it, open the next, and close it.
There's a way to close that. So I have one community that does the permits on a 10-year rolling average.
Yes, okay.
So that is a very, I'm going to tell you right now, that is a very strict and hard way to do it. And you will get pushback on it, but it is very effective.
Okay, so that's the triggers where there's always a workaround. And we'll use this North Maris property, the old Winn-Dixie, as a great example. All right, so they spent $1 million on the facade, and they're gonna close that permit, and it set no triggers. But then they're gonna go inside, and each one of those individual units is gonna spend $1 million. But that's gonna be a different permit, it's gonna be under something different. So at the end of 5 years, the property will have been completely renovated, because they're not gonna run off those old ACs and that old water, but they're just gonna use the system's weak rules to not have to invest in bringing themselves into compliance. Every developer would do it, I'd do it, you would do it. So by applying a modified FEMA 50% rule, and we could do that now, you call it a rolling total?
I call it a rolling average is what I've called it. And I will tell you that not only did we get pushback from the community, we also got pushback from FEMA. FEMA did not want to approve our floodplain ordinance because we had this 10-year rolling average that was more strict. They want everybody to be the same. They want all those to be the same. And we had to fight for it. And we fought for 3 to 4 years with FEMA. I actually had to hire special counsel from Orlando to fight FEMA to approve our floodplain ordinance. So
can we just decouple it from FEMA and floodplain and just make this a
Well,
stormwater issue?
I was gonna say that we have, it's not exactly the same type of mechanism, but maybe something kind of similar that's built into the special area plan and the SMART code. And it basically talks about adaptive reuse of a property. So there's an already existing building on a piece of property that's developed, and it says that basically you don't need to bring certain features, site features, parking, landscaping, stormwater, up to the current standard if you don't trigger a substantial modification. And how that's defined in the SMART code is a certain percentage of the assessed value at the time. So we have kind of a mechanism to do that, and we basically take the cost of what they're wanting to do, and that's an aggregate cost, and we include all permits that are associated with it, and to, do that percentage and calculation. And if they trigger a substantial modification, then they have to bring everything into compliance. If they don't, then they don't. But I think that that's how it's currently structured isn't the easiest way to do that, but it's kind of getting in line with what I think you're wanting. But we can look at a more efficient way to calculate it.
Ms. Kardash, does the FEMA 50% apply to commercial, or is it just primarily residential? Because my focus is on your 10 biggest.
Mega parking lots.
Yes, it's not the residentials. We're not gonna fix that. But, so does the FEMA 50% apply to commercial?
Yeah,
Does it?
Yeah, it
So there's no
applies
cha-
across
that
the
makes
board.
no difference.
Doesn't matter. There's some other flood modifications you can do to commercial that you can't do to residential.
Okay.
Something like with the breakaway walls, dry
proofing.
proofing.
I'm speaking
dry
outside
flood
my
proofing
world.
or something, yes.
Right,
That you can do to commercial buildings, so.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, that went
So-
terrific.
So I think there's opportunity, but from comp plan standpoint, I think it's putting the policy in there that basically gives us the direction to do the regulatory side of it. And so we have some notes from our previous conversations to add in. So yeah, I think we can get there. It's just a matter of
My
figure out the
question
best
is,
mechanism.
Is there a process that to encourage existing property owners on these mega parking lots to do something different where we would agree to reduce the parking requirements in exchange for green space if they were proactive in doing something, even though they don't wanna. Because, you know, repaving a parking lot, especially the size of Winn-Dixie or Publix, is extremely expensive, okay? Would it be cheaper for them, you know, we don't require a permit to repave your parking lot, but would it be cheap, or do we?
So,
Not for reasons.
well, it depends on the
Surface.
situation. But, so one thing, like, so we have in our code, and it's not very expansive, we have different parking reduction standards, and we have our parking reduction allowance if you're trying to preserve existing trees. I think that's an example of an opportunity where we can look at the development requirements and say, hey, can we put another incentive and say, not only a parking reduction for
Provide
preserving
you-
trees,
we'll
but if you
provide you the
exceed
tr-
a certain
we'll-
amount,
we'll
then you
provide
get
the
less
landscaping.
parking.
We'll
Well, I don't know if
provide
we
the
can do
landscaping.
that. But I'm saying, like, we can provide, you
have a
can
tree
provide
bank.
extra parking,
Don't we have tree banks?
add extra trees.
And palm trees should not be considered a tree.
We have a certain allowance of how many palm trees you can use, 25%, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah. Plus, we have lots of other city projects that our municipal arborist is working on. She's got grants for different tree canopy things. So there's lots of things that maybe some of this stuff can come into play.
We looked at the tree canopy over the overlay, if you remember, and, you know, it's pretty bare in certain corridors of this city. And I know I'm off, and I know I'm going off on, we're moving away from here, and I think 9 o'clock's gonna be a hard 9 o'clock tonight.
Yeah.
But there's gotta be something that we could do that, you know, they could just say no, or they could say, that's a good idea, you know, it's good PR, put it in the paper, this is what we're doing.
I just see Publix doing it. I don't know about anybody else.
I can see Publix, I can see Publix doing it, because Publix, you know, embraces that kind of stuff.
I think one potential, my last thought on this is, like I said, if you build it into your code to give you options, mechanisms to, you know, someone may not want to provide all that required parking, but we're like, hey, put an extra tree or 2 extra trees or a larger green space or something like that. If you have those mechanisms in your code, it gives flexibility and options. Or at least gives, you know, staff or the board flexibility to grant waivers or exceptions to basically accomplish a greater goal or intent.
You know, you go through certain New York communities where there's a shopping center. You see the sign, but it's hard to see the shopping center itself because of all the greenery in there, and it makes it more attractive to go in and shop, but that's.
And Florida's very hot.
Yeah, so going back to goal 3, I agree with you. You wanna, where were we? Where did you say take out cost effective?
Yeah, definitely.
Provide an efficient
goal,
stormwater
yeah.
management
I
program.
got that. So remove that. Yeah,
Any
that
other
was from the.
changes on goal 3? Anybody have any other questions on goal 3? Just we went off on a long tangent. Objective 3.2. There's that cost effective. Take out that cost effective.
Okay.
I had made a note under objective 3.2. Is there a current map that highlights the deficient stormwater areas? Meaning the areas that flood, there's the obvious ones, but so for all the proposed work or the improvement of the stormwater system, is there a map that says these are a 10 and an 8 and a 7 on the scale?
Yeah.
Does that exist?
There's exactly that, and it's in the stormwater action plan.
Pretty much.
That's updated
I just had a brain.
periodically.
Does the city have its own MPDES permit?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's like you, Pinellas County, and Indian Shores, and maybe St. Pete? Are you guys the only ones that have them? I didn't know you had your own MPDES permit, so.
What is that?
Is that cool?
Sounds really good.
I don't know who else has that.
I know that there's not, like, there's very few.
What is that?
I know that she's not saying.
For years on.
It's for, when you push water out into like other waterways, so like
Okay.
into the intercoastal, and I could see why, because you've got the Anclote and all these areas here,
A
where
lot of it
you
gets
are.
dumped in the bayou.
Right, right, and kind of like how, and training on like how to treat the water, how to make sure, people don't like dump their chlorinated pool water into the river, stuff like that, it's really bad for the environment. So, and there's like additional things you have to do to maintain that permit, on an annual basis, like training and, public information sessions and things like that on it, so. But yes, it is special.
Yeah, add that to our city page.
You've got frontage, you pay stormwater fee. I pay stormwater fee, my office is on 2 roads. Even though all my runoff comes from Orange Street, it's not my runoff, it's the city's runoff that I maintain, but I gotta pay for the stormwater. You think a parking lot by the size of, let's say, Publix or Winn-Dixie pays significant in stormwater fees every month. Reduce, you provide your retention, will reduce your stormwater fees.
Yeah.
See, you're there, man.
Okay, I'm sorry. Anything else on this section? Moving on to objective 3.3.
And that's where your fees are. 335, the fee program.
Moving on to 3.4, unless anybody has any, wants to go back to 3.3.
What proactive enforcement program do we have against illicit discharge of pollutants?
People can call in, but we do have our stormwater crews do monitor illicit discharge, either direct observation or,
nice.
evidence
Okay.
of discharge. And those are cited.
Yeah, a lot of times it's, I hate to say it, but a lot of times it is contractors that you can't catch
It's tough to
dumping stuff into
enforce.
the, yeah.
Yeah.
We did 4. And that's pretty much it.
That's the utility zone.
Okay,
Unless you-
it's 8:30. I don't think it'd be good to start another whole section tonight.
I'll second.
Okay.
Anybody thoughts?
Conservation next time, start
Yeah,
fresh.
Yeah.
Okay. And I will send you so we do have our next meeting is next Monday. It'll be here in this room at 6 o'clock. We'll kind of regroup tomorrow, but we'll send you 1 or 2 extra elements to go through. Conservation's probably, more subjective. Utilities was pretty straightforward, cut and dried. You've got a couple more that are like capital and stuff, so,
I
We'll bring
suspect.
Made it pretty exciting.
Yeah, actually, I
Yeah.
think this was a good meeting.
yeah.
I suspect that depending on the agenda, for the next meeting, if it's like this meeting, we could probably knock one of these sections out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too.
In the spirit of the conservation, do you want to collect these for the next meeting, or would you like us to bring
Yeah,
them?
I'm probably gonna lose it.
I'll tell you what, I'll collect them, yeah. And then you'll have them, they'll all be done.
Okay.
Yeah, 6, yeah, because tonight was the regular
Yeah.
meeting.
Oh, it was early this time.
No, I'm gonna collect them and we're gonna bring them back.
I'm gonna write my name on mine, because I
Please
wrote
strike
notes
me.
on it.
I have a retention pond on my office, and my retention pond fills up, and it doesn't fill up from me. It fills up from Orange Street. It's in the city road. That's what fills it up. And I get, and every time I pay my water bill, I look at my stormwater, I say, why am I paying for the city's stormwater?
It's not the part of Orange Street they're getting
Yeah,
ready to
it's well-
redo, is it?
Pardon?
It's nice
Part
and
of Orange
clear.
Street
Yeah.
they're getting
And
ready
it's
to redo,
touchscreen.
it's not that part, it's down.
That's even cooler.
Orange Street's higher
It's
than,
funny because between that and the iPad, then I go to some.
then I got a lift
And
station
I'm like, oh my God.
that pumps my stuff up to
I was
Orange.
supposed to be able to make it at all tonight because I had a deposition. It went forever. I was so annoyed. But my client.
Crap does run uphill.
Yeah.
I'm making chicken soup at home because I was so cold this morning. When I took the dogs out, I said, I'm
I
not.
don't need this to adjourn the meeting, but meeting's adjourned.
Okay, we're adjourned.
Her iPad
Might be a badge of honor.
So I was like, oh, so I would make the meeting.
Yeah, the newer ones, the
All
batteries are
right,
a little
thank
better,
you.
but there's a point of overcharging.
I didn't send
Charge
a
it for like
packet
at
out.
least 15 to start like using it,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
Zoom or something.
And that's the whole thing between Vimeo and the other stuff now. It sucks up, yeah, yep. Sucks up. All right, feel better.
Nice.